Hello, I'm Dustin with Kruger Instruments and Kruger's Training Academy. Today we're going to go over the USC 10th edition procedures testing the RP valve, utilizing a 2-valve test kit. We're going to be using the Kruger Instruments TK2. It has 2 valves, high bleed, low bleed. There are no control valves if you're using a different type of kit. Quite often there's 3 or 5 valve arrangements. This is a 2-valve arrangement. We have a line pressure gauge, 0 to 15 on the scale. Descending scale, 0.2 psi accuracy. High is on the left, low is on the right. And then we have the RP valve, pretty standard. If you're in a class, you're going to see more or less the same thing. They might be a little smaller or bigger. If you're out in the field, quite often they're detector checks and things like that. This is mostly for the classroom type instruction, but also it could be applicable in the field if you want to refresh on your test procedures. 4 test cocks, 1, 2, 3, 4. They typically go in order from inlet to outlet. Sometimes these two are reversed. For this is a Watts 009, so they are properly, where test cock 2 is a little before test cock 3. Shut off 1, also called the inlet shut off. Shut off 2, also called the outlet shut off. We're going to be using 3 hoses. USC 10th edition, they have a 3-hose or multi-hose test for the RP. Everything else is single hose. There are other procedures. If you check out our website and check out the YouTube channel, there's like the ASSE notably has a single hose procedure for all of the types. If you want to look at what you're supposed to use in your area, there's different procedures for every area. Definitely check with your local jurisdiction on what procedures you're supposed to be using. There's a high hose. We make the high hose red. Some other test kits might have them different colors or in different arrangements. We use high as red, low as blue, and then your vent hose or bypass hose is yellow. For the USC, you're supposed to have the high to the red to the high to the bottom high side, low to the bottom low side. Then you actually loop your vent before you start to the low side of the gauge. First step, I know what you're thinking, oh, I'm going to start flushing test cocks. Actually, the first step is notify, identify, inspect, observe. You should know what those mean. If you're in a class and you're studying for an exam, a lot of times you have to kind of explain more who are you notifying, what are you observing, things like that. We say just say those 4 words, make sure you're doing all the proper things. Then you flush your test cocks. For USC, they want you to leave them all open. So you open 4, open 3, open 2, open 1, close 1, close 2, close 3, close 4. Install appropriate fittings. This one already has them. You should have 1/4 inch flare coming up. Some proctors at different schools, they want you to say like, I'm installing my fittings. If they're already there, they probably are already there. If you're out in the field, a lot of times the test cocks are either 1/2 inch or sometimes even 1/4 inch or 3/4 inch. Raw end where you have to screw in adapters. For us, they're already installed, but it is a step that we want to do at that point. Close all needle valves. There's only 2, so you just close the 2 needle valves. Attach your high hose to test cock 2. Attach your low hose to test cock 3. For USC, they're very particular. They don't want you to jump the relief valve before you do the test. So the relief valve might be sitting there for a while before you start the test, maybe 6 months or even a year if it hasn't been exercised in the entire period. You want to get that reading when it first opens, so you have to be very careful not to open the relief valve. So you want to open your test cocks a little slow. You want to have water flowing through before you start opening the earlier test cocks. So you go ahead and open test cock 3. Open low bleed. You have water coming out usually, so you want to make sure you're aiming that in the proper direction. You might have a bucket if you're inside. Open test cock 2. You want to do these kind of slowly. If you bang them open, you can jump the relief valve, and if you do that in the field or on a test, a lot of times it does affect the outcome of the test. Open test or high bleed valve, get water running. At this point, you close your outlet shut off while water is running. Make sure you do that before you close your bleed valves. Next, you close your high bleed. The reason you close your high bleed first is because the gauge is descending scale accurate. So it's accurate going up, but not going down, but not going up. Now you close your low bleed. You're going to get an apparent reading. You don't write this down yet. It's possible that the check valve is open while you're testing it under this point. If you have a leaky outlet shutoff. So you don't get the reading, but some of the diagnostics will ask you to bring it back to apparent. So our apparent is 7.2. Each of the little tiny lines is 0.2. Each of the larger lines is 1. Starts at 1. We have a couple other videos explaining how the scales work on the different gauges. This one starts at 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 7.0 it's reading. This is actually when you get your first reading. If you look at the line pressure, it says 45. So that's the first reading you get on your sheet. So on your test report sheet, static line pressure 45. Next, we're going to do the relief valve opening point. You loop your bypass to your high side. So you have high and low both connected on your bypass. This is going to allow you to put back pressure into the zone to see the opening point of the relief valve. Open high. Now you open low. It's going to start dropping. At some point, the relief valve will start dripping. You want to get just a tiny little drip. If you open it too far, you're going to get a whole lot of water coming out and you'll get an inaccurate reading. We're getting 4, so 3, 4.6. So that's the relief valve opening point. You notice if you open up low too much, you're going to have it where, yeah, it's reading 3.8, but there's so much water coming out that it's not correct. It's like it's open at that point, but it's not the opening point. Close both bleed valves. We write down pressure differential relief valve opening point 4.6. Depending on the test report you use, you want to use the proper test report for your jurisdiction. USC does not have a procedure for open fully. The one hose ones do. So you just write NA if it's there. If you're using a class or you're in a jurisdiction that requires the USC 10th edition, they probably don't even say it. But if it does say it, you just write NA because you're doing a back pressure test on the RP opening point. Detach, so close both bleed valves, detach bypass hose from your low bleed. So leave it connected to your high and move it to the low. It's already bled for water. Some of the other procedures, if you have a larger kit, you have to bleed the hose. We don't because it's already been bled earlier in the procedure. Attach bypass hose to test cock 4. Remember your high is closed. Open test cock 4. If you notice your gauge, it's still reading like 5 or 4.9. That's because it's not reset. It's only accurate going down, not going up. So you have to reset your gauge. The way you do that generally is you open and close low bleed. Get it up to the high end of the scale. Back to 7.2, which is the apparent. Next, you're going to open your high bleed. This is going to introduce back pressure into check valve 2. If you notice, the gauge will go down a little bit. So now it's at 6.4. You're not worried about it. It says if steady, you get your check valve 2 is tight. Doesn't really matter if it goes down a little bit. You just don't want it to go all the way down and then dump the relief valve. So here we're going to say it's steady. Check valve 2 is closed tight. Your test report might have a PSI reading for check 2. That means they might require the auxiliary steps. Check out our other videos. We have videos with auxiliary steps. For us, since we're doing the USC 10th edition verbatim on this one, we just write NA because you didn't test the check valve 2 against back or for differential pressure. You only tested it for back pressure. Now we do the final test of number 1 check valve. Like we were saying, you have to reset the gauge because it's only accurate going down. So you go ahead and reset the gauge. Now we're reading 7.6. I would say so. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.8. It does matter how, like, what direction the gauge. So if you're looking at it from the corner, you're going to get a little different number than if you're looking at it straight on. You want to make sure Since it's an analog kit, you want to make sure your face or whatever eye you're using is directly over top of the pointer to get the right reading. So we'll say check valve 1. If you get a number, that means it's closed tight. So closed tight 7.6. For USC, they don't require you to test the shutoffs or indicate whether they're leaking or closed tight. If you have a leaky shutoff too, you would know in the test procedures that you go through the diagnostic videos, but for us, we're just gonna write NA since you didn't formally test them. And then of course, since you everything passed, the relief valve has to be at least 2, check valve 2 has to be tight, check valve 1 has to have at least 5. We'll say the assembly passed. Now that we're done the test, we go ahead and close the test cocks. Remove all equipment. Open shutoff 2. Some test procedures say restore to pre-test condition on the shutoffs. For USC, they actually just say to open them. I would say if you're in the field and you come up and it's closed, there might be a reason it's closed. The test procedures should be the same either way. So if it's already closed when you get there, you might not want to open it. But for us, we are going to open it. One thing that we want to look at, the reason you test check valve 1 last is because it's possible that shutoff is leaking. So some people ask this question, high is open and you have your hose looped through. That way, if shutoff 2 is leaking, it's leaking through the gauge. That's how you confirm that this check valve, which you're using a differential pressure reading on, is closed when you're testing it. So it's important to get this number 1 check valve at the end, not at the beginning when it's possible water is flowing through the assembly. Even if you close shutoff 2, you don't really know for 100% that shutoff 2 is tight. So anyway, I hope you appreciated this video. Feel free to like and subscribe, interact with the channel, make a comment if you got a question. A lot of times people have the same questions. So if you have a comment already, they find the answer to their question quickly instead of waiting for an answer. If you're interested in the Backflow test kits for Kruger Instruments, check out our website, krugerinstruments.com. They should be valid in your jurisdiction depending on where you're testing. They meet all of the specs. They're designed to the ASSE 1064 specifications as far as the components and the accuracy and all of that. Well, thank you for tuning in, and definitely like and subscribe to the channel.